My name is C. Rodney Dow, a Danbury, Connecticut centenarian, community and political activist, bibliophile, and historian. Bring back the rose trellises at Rogers Park. The white wooden trellises were adorned with climbing roses, blazed scarlet, yellow, and white. That was the beauty of the Danbury Veterans Rose Garden, planted in 1946. Time passed and they disappeared. Why? Because the city of Danbury forgot their veterans. Patriotism is ephemeral. It comes in waves, ebbs and flows according to the popularity of wars such as Revolutionary War, Civil, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf, Iran, ISIS, and so on. Today, society is tuned into veterans. The Danbury Concerned Citizens Group is bringing back the rose trellises in Rogers Park. The Rose Memorial Gardens with rose arbors was the creation of 100 concerned Danbury women in 1946, the year after World War II ended. Some of them were widows. I saw the unfolding mental trauma in that war, where I gave 5 of the best years of my life to my country, which I never regretted. After World War I, in Flanders fields, the poppies grow between the crosses, row on row. In Danbury, the roses grow row on row, and this is where I became a docent for the veterans of Danbury. The trellises died during the Vietnam War because of neglectful lack of interest during the worst war in American military history. It sent American men to jail, to Canada, and to become conscientious objectors. The old men in Congress who sent the young men to Vietnam with Agent Orange, they wanted to forget that war. With term limits, these old men in Congress would not be perpetual incumbents. But the veterans could never forget. It was scarred into their DNA forever. Every summer I work in the Veterans Rose Garden. I remove the Japanese beetles that eat the heart out of the rosebuds. I cut out the indigenous invasive plants and vines that smother and kill the native wildflowers and roses. They are on the state and federal list of aggressive, hostile plants from Asia and Europe. One invader that I welcomed was harmless and only wanted to be photographed while keeping me company. A woodchuck wanted to remind me that animals, birds, bees, butterflies, lived there peacefully before Homo sapiens, before the humans destroyed their habitat and drove them, some, like the passenger pigeons, to extinction. The summer of 2016 was a reverse exodus. Every day and night, 30 plus Pokemon, remember Pokemon?
Mm-hmm.
Every day and night, 30 plus Pokemon and Pokewomen arrived with their umbilical cords attached to their smartphones, computers. From New York, Connecticut, and I interviewed one couple from Tokyo and the Ukraine. The Genius program, the programmer at Poke headquarters, chose this beautiful habitat, and the visitors loved it. I took this opportunity to educate some of the visitors about the roses and the veterans of American foreign wars. They were mostly quiet, engrossed in one of the electronic wonders of their generation. If I saw any cigarette butts or litter, I simply pointed with my cane, and they hustled to pick them up and keep the park clean. I arrived one day with my standard equipment, cane, thorn leather gloves, and pruners. 2 teenage girls said, "We see that you are a handicapped senior citizen. Can we help you?" I gave them the gloves and pruner and pointed out the invasives. They loved doing something productive and to show that today's society is not going to hell in a handbasket, contrary to some opinions. Today's climate is favorable to return the trellises to show that Danbury has not forgotten what the veterans sacrificed for 5 years in World War II. Will someone help save the Rose Garden at Rogers Park? On the major holiday of July 4th this year, the towns around the city of Danbury had parades and public festivities. Danbury had none. The LL Bean outdoor school members and Boy Scouts cleared veterans' graves, and fireworks were observed. Forgetting and neglecting veterans extends to the World War II Memorial Rose Garden in Rogers Park. The Rogers Park Pond, the area was beautified with $300,000 last year. The $1 million artificial turf soccer field is superb in the park. Expensive renovations to the War Memorial building are well justified. Between these well-deserved enhancements sets the woefully neglected and forgotten World War II Memorial Rose Garden. The city uses this once beautiful setting to stage its organized, well-publicized celebrations on Memorial Day, August 15th, observing the end of World War II, and Veterans Day. The day before these holidays, city workers appear, pick up cigarette butts and plastic trash, plant a few marigolds and roses, and then disappear, never to be seen again until the next holiday. That's the reaction from the city administration today. It is the company is coming, dust off the vacuum cleaner syndrome. Meanwhile, the federal and state listed dangerous invasive plants from Asia and Europe pour into the garden to aggressively strangle and kill the rose plants. The city maintains and cares for beauty plants in Elmwood Park, the library, the main street, and around City Hall. They will not maintain plants in city memorials, citing budgetary constraints. Only one person works in this garden, a Hans Brinker type, finger in the dike, trying to stem the tide of overwhelming, hostile takeover invasives. He is a feeble centenarian handicapper, the last Danbury veteran of World War II still alive, who has retained his status as a Danbury community and political activist for 45 years. The state of Connecticut is in such dire financial straits that they sold a driver's license to this veteran that expires when he reaches the age of 103. When this Vermonter and Connecticut Yankee lived for 1 year in India, 1941 India, the temperature often hit 100 degrees. In the afternoon, the natives went indoors for a siesta. After the sun set and the fierce actinic rays subsided, they came out and resumed the business and their lifestyle. This year, July 4th in Danbury was so hot that I went native. When the wicked actinic rays disappeared below the horizon, I grabbed my cane and emergency smartphone and drove my 96 car 1 mile to Rogers Park. 2 Dominicans offered to help this handicapped veteran of American foreign wars on this major holiday, remembering when we won the American Revolution. A group of concerned Danburyans launched a crusade to replace the rose arbor trellises, fountain, and statue that were destroyed in this rose garden by vandals during the Vietnam War and never replaced by the city. This beautiful rose garden was planted in 1946 by 100 dedicated Danbury women. Some were widows. That was the beginning of the highly regarded Danbury Garden Club. They're the ones that take care of the flowers outside the library, the herbal garden, and so on, and the mallard duck that is there, sitting there. I have one over at an island I'm protecting in Danbury. She laid 11 eggs. That's a larger size, larger than a hen's egg. That little mallard duck, 11. And that duck that you have there, the library director told me that she comes every year, and is usually hiding behind the butterfly bush, but the butterfly bush was cut down and so on. So the duck was exposed. So the garden club put up a little barrier there and feed it with corn and water. So that was the beginning of the highly regarded Danbury Garden Club. The fountain and the cherub statue was not just functional, but artistically creative. We have searched for the sculptor in vain. Sadly, the once beds of roses have now become beds of aggressive invasive plants and vines and trees from Asia and Europe. Supporters of this crusade are welcome, looking for someone to help the Rose Garden, Rogers Park. In 1998, Danbury's memorial to the dead of World War II, the Rose Garden in Rogers Park, was rededicated through the volunteer efforts of the Council of Veterans. Members of Danbury's Committee of 100 Women, the volunteer group that created it 52 years ago, have all passed away. But some of their story remains in a News Times article from 1973. When the area was being plagued by vandalism and the Rose Garden was suffering with everything else during the Vietnam War, a wave of vandalism swept Danbury and the country in resistance of the worst war ever in the United States, the Vietnam War. In 1973, former members of the Committee of 100 were still around, and along with the Danbury Garden Club, handled the Rose Garden upkeep, including, according to the story, pestering citizens for appropriations. Also in Rogers Park, the World War II anniversary celebration in Rogers Park last month recalled a horrible lack of judgment committed by the mayor and the city council of Danbury. In World War II, the United States declared war on Japan after they murdered thousands of Americans in Pearl Harbor. They declared war on Germany after submarines sank U.S. ships in the Atlantic. The United States entered the Vietnam War because the Russian communists were helping the Chinese communists invade Vietnam, and we were engaged in a Cold War with Russia. The Danbury Veterans Council asked the city of Danbury to let it use city taxpayer land in Rogers Park that extends from South Street to the front of the War Memorial Building for the purpose of veterans' memorial installations, monuments. The entrance of Rogers Park is the most prominent location in Danbury because of heavy traffic on Main Street, South Street, and going into the park. The city said yes, but then proceeded to abdicate its responsibilities by placing no restrictions on the agreement. You cannot allow a situation like that without some control. That is why we must have laws. The city started to pay a heavy price. The World War II monument is buried back by the obscure corner of the War Memorial Building. If the Veterans Council had moved the World War II monument up next to the Rogers Park sign at the entrance of the park, all World War II veterans would have been satisfied. Instead, they destroyed the Rogers Park sign, city taxpayer property, and placed their Vietnam memorial precisely where that sign had stood since 1942, when Mr. Rogers gave the land to Danbury. It doesn't seem possible that the mayor and the city council would allow that monument to the most persecuted and controversial war in U.S. history to be located in the most prominent location in the city of Danbury. Yet that is what happened. But this is not the end of that sad tale. The horrible mistakes that men make can be rectified by better men. The Vietnam Memorial will be moved to a location in back of the Korean Memorial. The World War II monument will be placed next to the Rogers Park sign at the entrance of Rogers Park. This long-delayed, overdue change will not be done by the entrenched incumbent mayor of Danbury, 19 years in office. He is fully aware of the situation because of his political ties to the Veterans Council. His last attempt to move to Hartford as governor was aborted, but the future is loaded with possibilities. I have one other item here. When I moved to Danbury from Vermont in 1953, one of the famous celebrities in Danbury was Charles Ives. The other one was Marian Anderson, who lived in Danbury for 50 years. I operated a tennis facility on Joe's Hill next to Marian Anderson for 25 years. I was able to talk with her, visit her. She had 100 acres on Joe's Hill with cattle, horses. Often we would ride around on her property. But the other celebrity, Charles Ives, when I arrived in Danbury in 53, he was still alive. Pulitzer Prize winner. The following year, I had a chance to meet him in 53. The following year, 54, is when he died. But in the New York Times, there was an article about Charles Ives. Of all of the otherworldly sounds that composers invented in the 20th century, nothing quite matches the cosmic shudder of the opening of Charles Ives' unfinished Universe Symphony, in which 19 percussionists and a piccoloist, each playing in a different meter and at a different tempo, generate a swirling nebula of rhythm in a realization of the work prepared by the composer, Larry Austin. The pulses converge every 8 seconds, the synchronicity marked by a tolling bell. All of this in that Ives Symphony. The Nashville Symphony will bring this tremendous conception to Carnegie Hall on May 12th. The universe may reverberate the longest. A few minutes in, you are ready to believe that Ives' bell has been sounding for billions of years.
Can you talk about when you met him? Can you tell me about when you met him?
What?
Tell me about when you met him.
I just told you. I told you I arrived in Danbury in 53 and met him, and he died in the following year.
I know, but can you tell me about the meeting? Like what that was like?
I was a musicologist in Vermont, and so when I found out about Charles Ives after I moved here, I arranged to meet him, and at that time he had moved to the location where he died in Reading. Did you ever see that place?
Mm-mm.
Yes, that house there, and of course the house that he was born in is now in Rogers Park, along with Marian Anderson's studio. When Marian Anderson moved from Danbury to Oregon for her sister, preparing to die when she was in her 90s, the city decided to move her studio from Joe's Hill down to the Scott Fenton Museum. So I was with a group from the city that went up there to look over the original location on the Marian Anderson farm, look it over, and planning the move through the city of Danbury. I have a photograph of Marian Anderson standing right there in back of the studio next to a little stream flowed down into her property from across Joe's Hill, the street. And she had built a barbecue over the little stream that she enjoyed and made a little pond, an offshoot of water from the little brook. And I have a photograph of her standing right there by the pond that she created near the barbecue with the background of her studio. And her studio, before it was moved, I brought some photographs of that into the Danbury Scott Fenton Museum. They have that in their file.
Wonderful.